A dazzling evening, filled with the city's most powerful and influential figures, takes an unforeseen turn when a security guard makes a mistake that will haunt him forever. What happens when the truth becomes clear? Too late. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Olivia Carter stepped out of the sleek black town car, exuding an effortless elegance that turned heads. Her emerald green gown, sculpted to perfection, accentuated every curve as if it had been woven just for this moment. Tonight's event had been hailed as the corporate gathering of the year, an exclusive invitation-only affair for the industry's elite. And Olivia Carter wasn't just another attendee. She was the very reason half the room had come. As she approached the grand entrance of the Hilton Sapphire Ballroom, her eyes should have been drawn to the opulent sight before her, the towering gold-plated chandeliers casting a warm glow through the glass doors, the soft jazz music weaving a melody of sophistication into the air. But none of that was what caught her attention. No, it was the look, the one she had seen too many times before. Standing near the entrance was a broad-shouldered security guard, clipboard in one hand, earpiece in the other. His sharp gaze moved swiftly over the line of guests, scanning, assessing. Then his eyes landed on Olivia, and something in his expression shifted, a flicker of hesitation, a question left unspoken but deeply felt. She braced herself, already knowing what was coming before it happened. The moment she stepped forward, he moved, deliberate, firm, placing himself in her path. "Ma'am, this area is for VIP guests only," he stated, his tone measured but unmistakably resolute. Olivia's lips curved into a practiced, polite smile, the kind that had been her armor in moments like this. Her flawless curls bounced slightly as she tilted her head. "I know," she said smoothly, her voice carrying the quiet assurance of someone who belonged. "That's why I'm here." The guard's gaze flickered over her once more, as if searching for some unspoken proof, some tangible evidence of her worthiness. She could almost hear the unspoken demand in his silence. "Show me you belong." She exhaled slowly, keeping her composure. She wasn't about to make a scene. Not yet. "Olivia Carter." She gave her name, watching him closely, waiting for the moment recognition would dawn. But it didn't. His expression remained blank, indifferent. "I don't see your name on the list," he said, his voice edged with something she couldn't ignore. Amusement, perhaps? Or was it something else? Something far too familiar? Olivia's fingers brushed against the diamond bracelet on her wrist as she let out a measured breath. "That's interesting," she mused, her voice light but edged with steel. "Because I was personally invited." The security guard's posture didn't change. His stance remained firm, his skepticism barely concealed. "Do you have an invitation on you?" he asked. A single brow arched in response. "An invitation?" she echoed, the word tasting bitter on her tongue. She didn't need an invitation. She was the invitation. She had been announced, advertised, celebrated as the keynote speaker of the night. Yet, here she stood, being asked for proof in a way no one else had been. Her patience thinned. "I wasn't given a physical invitation," she said, keeping her voice steady, "because I'm the keynote speaker." For a brief second, the guard hesitated, as if the words didn't quite compute. Then, to her disbelief, he let out a short, incredulous chuckle. "You're the keynote speaker?" His tone was laced with something she couldn't ignore. Doubt. She held his gaze, unwavering. "Yes, the keynote speaker, the reason this entire event is happening." Silence stretched between them, thick, weighted. Olivia could see it, the moment when realization should have struck him, the moment when he should have pieced it all together. But instead of recognition, instead of the understanding, she saw something else entirely. Doubt. Not the kind born of confusion, but the kind rooted in something much deeper, something uglier. His gaze swept over her once more, dissecting every inch of her, the designer gown, the jewelry, the meticulously manicured nails. He was searching, though she knew not for confirmation, but contradiction. He was looking for a reason to dismiss her, to justify his disbelief. His voice remained cool, detached. "I still can't let you in unless you show proof." For a split second, Olivia closed her eyes, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had been here before. She knew this dance, knew it too well. She inhaled deeply, then spoke, her voice sharper now. "I suggest you call whoever is in charge," she said, her patience slipping, "because if you continue standing in my way, you're going to regret it." The security guard's jaw tightened, his stance stiffened. And in that moment, she thought, hoped, that maybe he would realize the grave mistake he was making. But then he did the unthinkable. He gestured toward the back of the line. "You're going to need to step aside, ma'am." The words weren't loud, they weren't sharp, but they cut deep, the casual cruelty of them slicing through her like a blade, not because of their harshness, but because of their ease, as if this were routine, as if turning her away were just another part of his job. Her face was on the event's press release. Her name was plastered across the program. Yet here she was, being told to step aside as if she were nobody. A cold, slow-burning anger coiled in her chest. She could make a scene right here, right now. She could demand justice, demand acknowledgement, demand that he see the blatant discrimination unfolding between them. But Olivia Carter knew power. And this man? His authority was nothing but an illusion. So instead of raising her voice, instead of arguing, instead of letting him dictate the moment, she did something far more devastating. She smiled. Not a warm, forgiving smile. The kind of smile that carried the weight of his mistake. The kind of smile that sent a shiver down the spine of a man who had just unknowingly sealed his fate. And then, without another word, she turned on her heel, pulled out her phone, and made the call that would change everything. The moment Olivia Carter turned away from that security checkpoint, the countdown began on a mistake that could never be erased. Brent Wallace, the security guard who had dismissed her, stood tall with a self-satisfied smirk, believing he had simply done his job. But his confidence would be short-lived. Less than 5 minutes later, the consequences of his decision would tear through the event like a storm, leaving ruin in its wake. Inside the ballroom, an air of prestige and exclusivity filled the space, the city's most influential executives and power players mingling beneath golden chandeliers. Champagne glasses clinked, laughter flowed, and the unspoken dance of corporate hierarchy played out in hushed conversations. At the far end of the room, Elliot Ramsey, the CEO of Ramsey Global Investments and the event's primary sponsor, was engaged in a strategic discussion with his board members when his phone vibrated against his palm. He ignored it at first, lost in negotiations, until it buzzed again, and again. Irritated, he pulled it out, only to feel a cold jolt of panic as he read the message from his assistant. "You need to fix this." Now Olivia Carter is locked outside. Security won't let her in. Elliot barely absorbed the rest, his mind short-circuited at 2 words, Olivia Carter. His stomach dropped, his pulse hammered. He snapped his head up, scanning the room with growing urgency. "Where's Olivia?" he demanded, cutting off a board member mid-sentence. A woman beside him frowned, glancing around. "She hasn't arrived yet, has she?" But Elliot didn't answer. He was already moving. Out in the cool night air, Olivia stood near the valet station, scrolling through her phone with an unreadable expression. She had made the call. Now, she simply waited. And then she felt it, the shift in energy, the disturbance in the carefully curated perfection of the evening. She didn't need to look up to know what was happening. The hurried steps, the sharp inhale of breath, the unmistakable tension radiating off a man who had just realized he had made the biggest mistake of his career. Elliot Ramsey burst through the grand entrance, his normally composed presence disheveled by urgency. His breathing was uneven, his steps were too quick. He was a man trying to undo the irreversible. "Olivia!" She didn't acknowledge him immediately. She let the moment stretch, let the weight of what had transpired sink into him like an anchor. Only then did she lift her gaze, her expression unreadable. Elliot halted in front of her, the mask of corporate indifference cracking to reveal something dangerously close to panic. "I just got the call," he said, voice tight with barely restrained anger. "Tell me this isn't what I think it is." Olivia's gaze didn't waver. Her voice was calm, unshaken. "Oh, it's exactly what you think it is." Elliot turned, his jaw tightening as he scanned the entrance, and when his eyes landed on Brent Wallace, his expression darkened with fury. He strode toward the security checkpoint like a man ready to deliver judgment. "You," he snapped, his voice cutting through the night air like a whip. "Tell me you didn't just block our keynote speaker from entering." Brent straightened, his posture defensive. "Sir, I was just following protocol. She didn't have an invitation and her name wasn't on the—" Elliot's sharp laugh cut him off, humorless and laced with fury. "You're joking." His tone was deadly quiet. "Tell me you're joking." Brent faltered, glancing between Olivia and Elliot, his earlier smugness crumbling into something fragile. I was just doing my job. People make all sorts of claims." Elliot's stare was ice. "Oh, I can promise you, Olivia Carter doesn't need to claim anything." He stepped closer, his voice lowering to something even more dangerous. "What did you think? That the black woman in a couture gown couldn't possibly be the one meant to take center stage? That she couldn't be the reason this entire event exists?" Brent opened his mouth to respond, then shut it again. The confidence he had wielded so carelessly earlier now dissolved into quiet horror. He hadn't checked. He hadn't even considered it. I didn't know," Brent stammered, but the words fell flat. Elliot's expression hardened. "You didn't know?" He let the silence hang before delivering the final blow. "Then let me educate you. Olivia Carter is a multi-millionaire business strategist. She's been featured in Forbes, Business Insider, and the Wall Street Journal. She has built companies you probably use without even realizing it. And tonight she was supposed to be on that stage." His voice dropped, sharp and unforgiving, "until you decided she wasn't." Brent's face had gone pale. His voice cracked. "What's going to happen now?" Elliot's response was swift, final. "You're fired." Brent's stomach twisted. "Wait. You are fired." Elliot's voice rang out with the weight of a gavel striking down a verdict. "Security will escort you off the premises. Immediately." Brent sputtered, but Elliot had already turned away, his full attention back on Olivia. "Olivia," he started, his voice softer now, remorse bleeding through. "I am so sorry. This is completely unacceptable. You should never have had to deal with this." For the first time that evening, Olivia let something flicker across her face. Not anger, not frustration, something quieter, heavier, disappointment. "Let's not pretend," she said evenly, "that this is the first time something like this has happened." Elliot didn't argue, because she was right. But Olivia wasn't finished. She stepped forward, her presence commanding in a way that needed no force, no theatrics, just truth. "I don't need you to fix it, Elliot." Her voice was steady, powerful. "The mistake was already made. What matters now is what you do next." And then, without waiting for his response, she walked past him, through the doors that should have opened for her the first time. The room fell silent as she entered, the weight of her presence undeniable. Heads turned, conversations halted. The energy in the air shifted, an unspoken awareness settling over the space. The woman they had been waiting for had arrived, and she wasn't coming in quietly. When Olivia reached the microphone, she didn't launch into her speech. She didn't introduce herself. Instead, she let the moment breathe. Then, with the room's full attention, she leaned in and spoke words that would be remembered long after the night ended. "There are two kinds of barriers in this world," she said, her voice smooth as silk but sharp as a blade. "The kind that keep things safe, and the kind that keep people out." She let the silence stretch, the weight of it pressing down on every person in the room. Then, with a knowing smile, she asked, "Which one do you think I faced tonight?" The ballroom remained dead silent, because they already knew the answer. She repeated her words, her voice smooth, yet laden with an unshakable weight. "Barriers tell a story, not just about those granted access, but about those deliberately kept on the outside, and more importantly, the reasons why. Her gaze swept across the room, lingering on the faces of those who had, just moments ago, been sipping champagne and engaging in hollow, practiced conversations. "Let's be honest with each other," she said, her lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't entirely devoid of amusement either. "If I looked different, if my skin were lighter, my hair straighter, if I fit the mold of what you expected, do you truly believe I would have been stopped at that door?" No one responded. They didn't need to. She already knew the answer. The silence that followed was not just stillness. It was a living, breathing thing, pressing against the walls of the grand ballroom. Even Elliot Ramsey, positioned near the back of the room, had lowered his gaze, his jaw clenched in the weight of his own unspoken remorse. Olivia inhaled slowly, steadying herself, then exhaled with deliberate ease. And just like that, she shifted the direction of the moment. "Now," she continued, her voice unwavering, "let's talk about why I'm actually here tonight." The crowd released a collective breath, relieved that she wasn't about to burn the entire room to the ground, at least not directly. "Leadership," she went on, glancing down at the notes she didn't need. "That's why we're gathered here, isn't it? To discuss how to lead, how to innovate, how to elevate our organizations to new heights. But let me tell you something real. True leadership begins with the things we choose not to ignore." She paused, allowing the words to settle, to root themselves in the minds of her audience. Tonight, someone made a choice. She didn't need to name names. Everyone knew. They chose to assume I didn't belong. They chose to challenge my presence in a way they hadn't challenged others. They chose to hold firm in their bias rather than question it. Another beat of silence. Then she delivered the blow. "That," she said, her voice precise and sharp, "is bad leadership." The words landed like a thunderclap. A few shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others sat frozen, unable or unwilling to meet her gaze. "But here's the thing about bad leadership," she continued, her head tilting slightly as if studying them. "It doesn't just exist at the entrance of an event. It exists in boardrooms, in hiring decisions, in the subtle ways we determine who gets access to opportunities, who receives funding, who is given a seat at the table. More shifting, more discomfort. Because the truth wasn't supposed to be comfortable." Olivia took a step back, allowing the tension to breathe. Then, in a voice both softer and stronger, she delivered the challenge. "The question is, what do we do now?" She let the words hang in the air, a challenge with no escape. Then she answered it herself. "We do better." A murmur rippled through the audience. "We choose better," she emphasized. "We interrogate our assumptions about who belongs where. We fix what needs fixing even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's inconvenient." She clasped her hands in front of her, her posture resolute. "Because that," she said, her tone like steel wrapped in silk, "is what true leadership looks like." This time, the silence in the room wasn't awkward, it was reverent. Respect hung thick in the air, and then, slowly, applause began. First, a few tentative claps, then more, until the entire room erupted, a standing ovation. The very people who had sat steeped in their own unspoken guilt were now on their feet, clapping, not out of politeness, but with something far more real: admiration. Olivia Carter hadn't just won the moment. She hadn't just won the night. She had changed the conversation entirely. And Brent Wallace, the ex-security guard? Nowhere to be seen. As the applause finally settled, guests began approaching Olivia, offering words of praise, expressions of acknowledgement. Elliot Ramsey, his expression still tight with bruised pride, made his way toward her. His eyes, however, were different. Not just regretful, but resolute. "Olivia," he said once he reached her, "that was incredible." She studied him. "I know." He exhaled, shaking his head. "I need to do better. Not just tonight, not just for optics, but truly do better." She arched an eyebrow, waiting. Elliot hesitated only a second before nodding toward the stage. "Would you be open to consulting with us? Helping us make real systemic changes within the company?" A slow, knowing smile spread across Olivia's face. She extended her hand. "Now you're speaking my language." Elliot took her hand, shaking it firmly. And just like that, something shifted. Not just in that moment, not just at that event, but in the very foundation of the way things had always been done. As the night wound down, Olivia Carter stepped outside, inhaling the crisp night air. She had arrived expecting to deliver a speech. She hadn't expected to make history, but she should have, because people like her, people who were underestimated, overlooked, dismissed, they didn't just prove people wrong, they changed the game entirely.